black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. All right. Here we go. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. Going to be speaking to Chuck, which was my dad's name. And not that that's relevant to the story, but just thought I'd let you know. And Chuck is actually a scoutmaster for the Boy Scouts. Chuck was out deep in the wilderness in Minnesota, and he had encounter after encounter after encounter while out there. And Chuck didn't really believe in Bigfoot, didn't really know what to make of it. And it wasn't until he came back into camp and started talking to some of the other scoutmasters that had been in the general area, and they started sharing encounters that they had while being out there. Very, very fascinating stuff. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. If you get a chance, check out the website. I went ahead and posted a blog yesterday. It was from the BFRO website. It was actually an encounter on the Oregon coast. I think it's titled Stormwatchers Encounter an Animal on the Beach. But it's a very fascinating encounter, and I know that beach well where that happened. And it's pretty much a ghost town 24/7. I mean, hardly anyone ever goes out there, especially during a storm. But it was a very fascinating encounter, and if you listen to the guy, I kind of retold the story, but if you listen to the descriptions and what he was seeing, and the saying taking 2 or 3 steps to walk up a 10-foot tall hill, it's a very fascinating account. And I know a lot of encounters happen out that way. I'm also working on an upcoming show regarding Sasquatch and possible language, and I'm hoping to get Ron Moorhead on and Scott Nelson to talk about their research into the language. And I was contacted by a guy a couple days ago who claims to have cracked the code. He talked about it being kind of an Arcadian proto-language that all languages come from, and he was naming off different phrases. So I hope to get Ron Moorhead on and Scott Nelson on to do a presentation for you guys on the possible language. The gentleman I talked to didn't want to come on, but he had a lot of great information. And again, if you get a chance, check out SasquatchChronicles.com. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Chuck to the show. Chuck, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you being here. How long ago did your encounter take place?
Let's see. This would have been in the summer of 2012.
And for the audience, would you kind of start from the beginning and tell us what you're out doing and just kind of walk us into what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I was a canoe guide at the time. I was working for the Boy Scouts of America. They have 3 high adventure bases in the U.S., and one of them is a canoe base. It's like right up on the Canadian border in the boundary waters from northern Minnesota. So we were based out of there, and basically I would take out crews of 8 other people, usually 2 adults, and then the rest were boys. This particular crew happened to be fairly young. I think my youngest was 11 on that crew, and the oldest was 14. And I would just take them out, get them point A to point B. If they wanted to go fish, we would fish. Or if they wanted to do mileage, we'd do mileage. So it was a pretty standard trip for this go around. Well, I guess it's worth noting. I'm gonna mention some places. So for anybody that knows the area, the maps that we use are called Fisher maps. They're made by the W.A. Fisher Company. These maps are circa 1983, and I think they're the ones they're still using. They're not entirely accurate because they're not really made so much for real navigation. But anyway, I'll be referencing those maps, and it'll make a little more sense to anybody that has one. So anyway, this particular trip, this was a 10-day trip, and it was right around night 7 that we started having something interesting happen. And so that night, we came in. We had to amend our trip because the boys just weren't physically big enough to do the mileage they wanted. So I decided to show them a waterfall out there. The waterfalls are kind of tough to come by in that area. It's relatively flat. So we went and found this waterfall. It's called Eddy Falls, and we hiked into it, messed around there for a minute, and then we camped pretty close to the waterfall on the next lake over, which was the south arm of Knife Lake. There's like Middle Knife, Upper Knife, and then the south arm. And they're like 3 kind of long finger lakes that hang out right next to each other. So we were on the south arm. We were camped right near the waterfall. Like I said, we could even hear the waterfall from camp. So that night we were in bed asleep. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, just based on how dark it was. Because out there, it's in the midsummer, you don't get full dark until probably 11:30, and it doesn't start to get light again pretty early. So just based on the fact that it was fully dark, I would say it was probably between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning when this happened. I was asleep in my hammock, and I would generally set up my hammock like pretty far away from where my crew was, just like to have a little space at night and read my book or whatever. And I would usually just string my tarp up, throw a tarp over my head rather than pitching it like outright, just to keep the dew off of me. It wasn't going to rain that night. So I'm covered. My head's covered. I'm in my hammock, and I wake up and I hear, it sounded like sobbing. It was like a woman kind of sobbing, kind of like, I don't even know how to explain it, like in between cries, kind of, that kind of breathing, real rapid sound, And I could hear this off toward my feet out in the brush, and I can hear the footsteps as well. There's footsteps coming with the sound, and they're coming kind of in the direction of my feet, but off to the left also. So it's actually kind of moving more toward where my crew is camped at in the main campsite. But I'm listening to it and trying to place it because the footsteps just weren't. They were weird. It sounded like 2 feet, like it was on 2 feet. Because I've listened to bears move, and they're not very distinct about the way they move. They just kind of, crash through. I'm sure you've heard bears, and moose are the same way. I mean, moose are huge. It's a moose coming usually. And so I'm listening to it, and I'm like, I thought it was a person, when I was sitting there listening to it, because nothing else made any sense. But I'm laying under the tarp, and I can't see any light. There's no, I can't see any light coming through the tarp. So whatever it is in full dark, which I thought was really interesting because it's thick brush out there and brambles, and it's just, it's not manageable in the light, much less pitch black. So I'm laying there and listening to it, and I kind of listen to this thing as it moves through camp. So I actually heard the pads of its feet move from like the brush and all the pine straw and the sticks and all that, and onto the rock, the granite, just kind of hard packed dirt and granite of the campsite. And that's when I could really hear the weight of whatever it was kind of stepping through the site there. And so I listened to it. I was probably, I don't know, I was 50 to 100 yards off from the site. And I could hear it that far away. That's how heavy it was. And I listened to it as it pretty much came straight through camp, and it was heading directly toward where I was set up in my hammock. So now I'm still laying there. I'm trying to decide what to do, because I'm kind of, I'm thinking bear, at least bear protocol for whatever it might be. And so I'm just, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna lay still, and maybe it'll move on, what have you. And I listened until this thing got up. I mean, right next to me. It was on my left side, and it was just standing. I could feel the body presence of it, just standing right next to the hammock. And because I woke up before with bears next to the hammock, and they're pretty obvious, but this thing was, pretty silent, other than loud breathing. I had a really kind of a raspy breathing, and so I could hear the breathing, and I could just feel that it was just standing there, kind of looming over me. And I was like, what, what is this? So I decided, all right, well, something's up. So I threw the tarp off, and when I threw the tarp off, my left hand actually struck it, the body of this thing. And I hit it like right in the chest, because I could just feel this pure muscle, like, like if you were to, hit a strong man in the chest, just that kind of solid bulk muscle. It wasn't fat. It was just solid muscle, and it was covered in hair. Like, I mean, at the time, honestly, I had kind of long hair and, a big beard. And after 7 days on the trail, it kind of felt a lot like my hair did at the time. I have really coarse hair, and it gets super, knotted and matted down. And that's kind of what this thing felt like. But it was even thicker than that. The hair was just, it was just incredibly coarse. And, it was hairy. This thing was really hairy. And so as my hand hit it, I got to touch it for maybe a second. It was very quick. This thing took off back down toward my feet and back into the brush. And I just heard it, crash on through the brambles down at my end. So I'm fishing around for my headlamp, find my headlamp, get up, looking around, no sign of anything at all, except you could see clearly where it had gone through all the brush. So I start thinking about it, and I'm like, all right, trying to think logically about it. And I'm like, all right, maybe one of these big instructors got up, or one of the big scoutmasters got up, and, maybe he's got a hairy chest or something, and I just was half asleep. So I go over to camp, and I'm doing head counts, and they slept through the whole thing. None of them woke up for it. So they were all sound asleep. So got to exclude them. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe it was a bear, who knows? So I just, because what else do you think, And so I got back in the hammock and just kind of laid there and read a book till morning. And it was probably like another hour and a half till the sun came up. Once the sun was up, I got up and did a round through camp to see if I could find any tracks at all. And there was nothing, because like I said, it's pretty hard packed dirt and granite. Really difficult to determine anything. So I couldn't find any prints, or any kind of tracks. But I did find the definite path where it had crashed through going out at my feet. And I mean, it was thick bramble for this. And this thing was out of earshot so quickly. I remember that being something that I was really amazed by, how fast it was just gone. I couldn't hear it anymore. Just kind of dumbfounded. And so I was just like, all right, well, not gonna say much. I told the crew that we had a bear in camp the previous night, because that's pretty much what I, attributed it to. And kind of went from there. I was like, we'll just be real careful with our food at the next site. And so we packed up and we started heading on. And so this would be night 8 at Robbins Island. So Robbins Island you can find on it's on one of the maps. So the Fisher maps that I'm using are F10 and F11, which makes sense for anybody that has those. But Robbins Island is on one of those 2 maps. So this is about 22 miles down the lake, the South Arm, from where we were the night before. So we're kind of like midway down the South Arm of Knife, camped on this small island. There's two campsites on the island there, and campsites are designated by a fire grate and a grumper, which is just a toilet. We call it the grumper. So anyhow, that's how it's, you can camp there. So we decided to settle on the island. I was like, less chance of bears potentially if we're on this small island. So we settle in, get there, and I had the boys working on camp setup. I had the 2 adults working on cooking dinner with the camp stove, and then I was going to get fire. So I'm out gathering firewood. I was probably no more than a quarter mile down from camp, just kind of on a dead end little trail, maybe a game trail or something. But people had been using it to collect wood. It was pretty obvious, but there was tons of deadfall back there. So it was, really easy pickings. So I'm back there and I'm collecting up firewood, and I hear off to my left side, I can't see over there. Like I said, it's so thick. But over to my left, I hear a scream. And there's been a few, I wish I could remember which sound it was that I've heard on YouTube that was really close. But I mean, it was loud. I've never heard anything like it. And it stopped me dead in my tracks. I mean, it stopped me, and it kind of, I don't want to say it knocked the breath out of me, but I involuntarily almost like barked back at it. Like it just kind of took me by such surprise that I just made a noise, an involuntary sound. It was really strange. And so I listened to it. I mean, I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And it screamed a second time. And this thing's coming closer from my left, almost like it's just kind of hauling toward me. And I'm like, this might be it right here. It's like, I just didn't know what to do. But I'm standing there listening to it. It screams the second time, louder, angrier sounding. Then it goes a third time and a fourth time, and it's getting closer each time it does this. By the fourth and the fifth one, I was pretty amazed when I first heard about you guys' encounter, the way you described, like you got hit in the chest almost,
Yeah.
And then it did take the air out of me. That fourth and fifth one just completely took the air out of me. And I just didn't know, I wanted to puke, was dizzy, had no idea what was going on until, I started doing research and learning about infrasound and all that type of thing. But man, it just rattles you. It rattles your cage.
Yeah,
but it screamed about like 5 times probably before I kind of like snapped to, and I was like, all right, I got to get back to camp, make sure my crew's all right. So run back without the wood pile, and they're all kind of standing around just like, what the hell is that? And what do you tell? What do you tell a bunch of 11, 12-year-old boys that you're in charge of? I had no idea what to tell them. I told them it was a wild boar. I made something up. They don't have wild boar up there. That's why I chose that. But these guys are from Oklahoma, and the 2 scoutmasters knew immediately that was not a boar. And I pulled them aside, and I had to tell them that I didn't know. I had no idea what it was. So camp that night, I stayed pretty close to camp. Actually, I was pretty scared. But I mean, because we had listened to this thing scream probably 13, 14 times total, and it seemed like it was kind of right through a grove of trees somewhere on, I guess, our part of the island. I'm not sure exactly, but I mean, it's horrifying. So we didn't sleep all that well that night. But night 9, so this was I decided to kind of change it up for these guys a little bit, and we decided to do a night paddle because nights were starting to get kind of intense, and I guess they were all kind of feeling it. And I was like, all right, guys, we're going to rest today. We'll sleep it off in the sun and fish all day, eat, and then pack up and head out at night and paddle almost the rest of the way back to base camp. So we did that. We had a really, really mellow day. Nothing at all happened. And then we left around 9 or 10 that night, packed up everything, and we headed out. We were going southwest back toward base. We did probably another 30, 35 miles. And you have to come through you go through from Newfound Lake to Moose Lake, which Moose Lake is where our base camp is, and Newfound is connected to Moose by a really tiny pinch. So you can paddle between the 2 of them, but it's pretty narrow. You gotta hit it straight on because this is pretty shallow water right through there. It's kind of 1 to 2 feet deep. Fully loaded canoe, you'll bottom out if you're not dead center through this thing. It's probably 50 yards wide at the most. It's not a very large channel. So 2 a.m. probably, we're coming through there. We're shooting pinch right through the middle. I'm in the lead canoe, sitting in the back of it, steering it through there to show everybody else where to go. And as we're right in the middle of this, a rock comes out of the right bank. And I mean, when I say a rock, this thing was like probably the size of like a basketball or a bowling ball. I mean, it was a very large rock, kind of a boxy shaped rock, and it had an arc to it. I mean, this thing was, I don't know, probably 15, 16 feet in the air at the height of its arc, and it kind of had an arc, and it flew way out, all the way out to the middle to where we were, and it landed right in front of the canoe. I mean, if it had been 2 feet ahead, it would have swamped the canoe because they were Kevlar canoes. It would have crushed it. So I was just dumbfounded, had no idea what to think. And, I mean, yeah, I was like, I don't know. I was like, I don't know, guys. I was like, paddle. We're going to the middle of the lake. So we got out in the middle of Moose Lake, and we tied off everything together and dropped an anchor, and we stayed out in the middle of the lake all night because I didn't know what else to do. And I mean, it's that area. There's no way that it would have been like, it didn't roll off of a cliff. There's no cliff right there. It's just trees. And this place is accessible by, canoe and float plane, really. We were kind of near the motor trail, but not to the point where people are going to be sitting out there with, I don't know, like a trebuchet. Like what? You know what I mean? Like what else would it be? And I just couldn't figure it out. I had no idea what to think about any of it. And neither did they. So we slept all night kind of in a flotilla out there, and we went back into base the next day, and we didn't really talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it. I didn't think I was really ready to talk about it because we weren't really sure what to think. And so I was just going to kind of write it off as weird. And so I was, at base camp, and I said goodbye to my crew. And the next day, kind of in between trips, you would work on base and do some kind of maintenance style duties. So it was that next day I was in the canoe yard, and a buddy of mine came back off a trail, and I had not seen him in a while. We trained together when we first got there, and we were both from down south. So, we were kind of good buddies, and I was just going to talk to him. So I was helping him put a canoe away, and you could just see on his face that something was off, just kind of the seen a ghost look. And so I asked him, how his trip was. And of course, I had not told him about anything that happened with us. And said, how was your trip? And he said, it was really good until they were on their second to last night. They were camped on Birch Lake, which is right in the same area as Knife Lake. We were, pretty close. One of their adult advisors, one of the scoutmasters, got up to go to the Grumper, which, like I said, is a toilet. They call it the Grumper because the bugs are so bad up there. Nobody ever wants to go use it. But so he said he'd gone up there to go to the Grumper, and he had just sat down. He said no sooner did he sat down than a gorilla ran across the path in front of him. That's what he called it. He said a gorilla ran across the path in front of him, and that it had to have been like 9 feet tall. This is based on the report from the scoutmaster. But yeah, 9 foot tall gorilla on 2 legs, said it ran across the path in front of him, just absolutely scared him to death. He came running back down the trail, and they packed up and left that camp that day, and started paddling back toward base camp. And on their last night, they had a rock thrown at them in the exact same spot that we did at the pinch there. So I thought it was really interesting, and I started thinking about him saying that it was 9 feet tall, and I thought about that night in my hammock, because I'd not thought about the size so much, really. I guess so much had happened, but as a rule of thumb, I string my hammock pretty high. I just always do it. I like to sleep pretty up off the ground, and so usually I'll string the ends of it as high as I can reach, and then that way the middle part is almost eye level for me, and I'm like 6'2". That way when I'm in it, I'm almost at my own eye level, basically, when I'm laying in the hammock. I was thinking about that, and if I hit this thing in the chest, and the chest was up at 6 feet, then that had to put the head at 8 or 9. And I just not thought about it in those terms until I heard about, somebody saying a 9 foot creature. And yeah, we just kind of were at a loss for words. But through those next couple of weeks, we kept having crews come off from that area that had heard screams or had rocks thrown at them, or I don't think there was any other sightings. I think that was the only sighting, but just people kept coming back with these stories. And the thing you have to remember is we're not in communication out there. The best communication we have is a satellite phone that might work if you really need it, and that's if you're lucky. We had no way to contact each other. There was no way for these stories to spread because we couldn't even be in contact with each other on the water. You can get fined for having more than 9 people in your group. So it was very strict that you don't talk to other groups. You don't stop and communicate with them. So, I mean, there's no way that all these people, You know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting, actually. I wanted to ask you about the crying.
yeah,
Did it sound like a woman crying, or did it sound like a man crying?
it sounded like a woman to me. It was just a little softer and not a whimper, but just that in between kind of like that kind of.
Yeah.
And it just kept coming, but it was just kind of a constant sound a little bit like that. And then it would stop. There was never any real cry to it, but definitely that kind of breathing, rapid shuddered breathing. And then there'd be nothing for a couple seconds, and then it would happen again. And that went on until it got into camp. Once it was in camp, it went completely silent until, till I guess the next day. If it was the same one, I'm not sure. But like I said, I didn't, when I touched it, I didn't feel breast or anything on it. It felt like a male's chest. So I don't know, maybe a juvenile. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes you wonder why it didn't hurt you. Almost like it was just curious on what in the world are you doing hanging in this thing.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah, definitely. Well, and the interesting part is because I still didn't know exactly what to make of all of it until we were sitting around, kind of probably a month or two later. Everything had calmed down, and the reports had stopped, and we were sitting around in the base camp, and we were talking about in the staff lodge, just kind of talking about experiences. And one of the veteran staff had been there for years, was kind of sitting over in the back of the room, just had a smile on his face, and was chuckling. And somebody finally, asked him what he's laughing about, and he said, yeah, it's about time somebody else saw him. Just like it wasn't news to him at all that they were up there.
Yeah, and that's usually
interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting. Well, what's interesting is this one. It almost makes you wonder. I mean, 22 miles really isn't that far for these things, but to have one come into camp, kind of stand over the top of you, and then take off, and we can assume it's probably a Sasquatch. I don't think it was a bear, but then to get a different type of behavior as you guys are going down the river. That boulder would have, even in a boat, man, you could sink a boat throwing a bowling ball size rock towards a boat.
Oh, most definitely.
And you see the strength of them too. I know what you mean. Like the night I had a log thrown at my head, I was like, wow, this thing really had some force behind it. Just like that, what man's going to throw a bowling ball size rock and launch it in the air like that? It's just,
Right.
I don't think it's possible unless it's a big man out there. Interesting. Have you been back to that area since you had this encounter?
No, unfortunately not. I was only up there doing a summer internship. Yes, I went when I was 17 and did an expedition myself as a scout, and nothing happened. Nothing like that at all. But yeah, I was only there for a summer. I had planned to go back, and then it kind of fell through. So no, that's it, man. That was my one summer up there. I'd like to go back for sure.
Yeah, and then the other guy saying he saw a 9-foot tall gorilla go running through, while he's trying to use the bathroom. Did the scoutmaster ever come out and say what he had seen, or did he just kind of smirk and say, yeah, they're real?
No, he never really talked too much about it. I know I've heard a couple of stories, because he also runs winter expeditions up there, which is actually dog sledding and snowshoeing on the frozen lakes. And I know he has a couple of stories about finding prints in the snow, pretty big ones. I'm not really sure on measurements or anything, but or even if he got pictures, but I don't know. I'd have to ask him. I'll see if I can get in contact with him.
Yeah, and the guy that saw the 9-foot tall gorilla, I mean, that really makes no sense. You said this happened in Minnesota?
Yeah, northern Minnesota.
Yeah, there's no gorillas in northern Minnesota.
Yeah.
But what a terrible time to run into one when you're, trying to do your business.
Down,
yeah.
Well, we're a good place, honestly, because then if you crap yourself, you're in the right place.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, and so is that what got you interested in this field, in the topic of Bigfoot, just this whole incident?
Yeah, definitely. It is. And I've been pretty lucky. I mean, my in school I studied outdoor recreation and outdoor ed, so a lot of work I've done has been, guide style or camp counselor style work. So I've actually had a really good platform to tell the story, and I don't know, people kind of love it. And it's like the one area I can work in and tell that story, and not, because I've tried to tell it, at the bar after a day in the kitchen, and people are like, man, this guy's nuts.
Yeah, not as crazy as they might think, though. A lot of people have these type of encounters a lot, especially hunters and guides, people out hiking. There's and it makes you wonder if obviously you guys are going downriver. The thing I never understand about the rock throwing incident is why. If you're floating down a river, you're moving out of an area. Why throw a rock at someone like that? Just to make yourself known? What was your take on it?
I think the whole time, we were too close. I think maybe, and because so many crews were coming back from that area, I think maybe that area got crowded just with people. And because it's not super far out from the base camp, so you are prone to run into more people, the closer you are to the motor trail. So, I think my theory potentially is that the one that came up on me while I was asleep, like you said, it just was surprised and I startled it. And then maybe it, went out and said, all right, there's people everywhere. And maybe they were continuing to maybe kind of chauffeur us out and away from their area. Just in terms of maybe there would be multiple ones with screams and the rock throwing, but I have no idea. So who can say? Yeah,
that makes sense. It sounds like they were frustrated that you were in the area, with the screaming you mentioned and then the rock throwing stuff. What did the kids think? Were they just freaking out? I mean, I think you did the right thing. I mean, staying out in the middle of the lake, even though these things can swim, I think you did the right thing. But what did the kids say to you?
Half of them were super interested and, wanted to sharpen some sticks and go find it. And the other half were just wanted to go home. And, but yeah, like I said, I didn't talk much to the crew about it because the topic of Bigfoot had not really come up at that point. At that point, it was still just strange happenings, from our standpoint, because I had not learned about the sighting yet. So it didn't really click until after they had already left. But I think one kid said he was like, maybe a UFO dropped it from the sky or something. I remember him saying that about the raft. That was like the one theory I think any of them had. And at the time, that was as good as anything, I had no idea what to think.
What do you think that these things are, Chuck? What's your own personal opinion? What do you think Sasquatch is?
I definitely think they're animals. I'm definitely not with you guys call the flute player crowd. Yeah, I think they're animals. I think they're really smart animals, way smarter than people are ready to give them credit for. I think that's why they obviously remain so elusive, because they know better.
Yeah, you definitely could be right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share the encounter. You have to let me know. I know you do a lot of guide work and you do a lot of different things. You're out in the wild a lot. You have to let me know if anything new happens while you're out there, will you?
Yeah, I definitely will. If you got just a couple of minutes, I've got one other thing that happened in North Carolina that was just curious, kind of interesting. You got time?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I was with a buddy. We were so this was right near Boone, North Carolina. So this is in Western North Carolina in the Appalachians, and we were going out camping. This was probably right before I actually went out there. It's probably the year before I went up to Minnesota. We were going out to find a waterfall called Little Lost Cove Creek Falls. And it is pretty hidden. And we missed the trail. We got entirely lost. So we finally were coming back up. We were getting near our camp. We were back on course, and the sun was starting to go down. And we were up kind of on a trail that was running up kind of on a ridge line, not quite a ridge line. We weren't on the ridge yet, but we were kind of on a switchback with it. We just had a real steep bluff on the side, and there was a creek kind of down at the bottom. And it was kind of twilight. You could see a little bit. And we heard these huge footsteps down in the creek, just kind of stomping around like somebody was just really stomping in the water. And we stopped and kind of looked down, and just straining through the dark, you could see a really large upright figure down in this creek. And it was just kind of stomping around and being loud. We didn't really know what to do. We were over it. We were lost. We were tired. We were ready to get back to camp. So I was like, all right, man, let's run. Cause we didn't have a weapon or anything. So like, let's book it. So we just ran back to camp, and didn't investigate further. But that night we had, just, twigs snapping, like branches breaking, but it didn't sounded more like when you like break a dead branch off of a tree for firewood or something. Like it had more of a pop quality to it. Like when you break pine branches, they pop.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a gunshot almost.
Yeah, totally. We had that happening off in the woods all around us for most of the night, along with just something scurrying around. We ended up sleeping in the vehicle actually. But that next morning we got up and I went to get breakfast out of the bear hang and found that the bear hang had been taken down, but not ripped down. It had been untied and dropped down, and the bag was open, and all of the fresh produce was gone. Like anything smellable, like our fruit was gone. I think there was 2 apples and a banana. We had some blueberries in there, but we also had canned goods, and all the canned goods were still there. Because at first I was like, I guess somebody just came into our campsite and stole our stuff. But why wouldn't they just take the whole thing? Like take the bag and the rope too, you know? And I never thought about it until I started listening to you guys' show and hearing about them getting into like chicken pens and things like that with, you know, door latches and locks and something that you need thumbs for. And then it kind of clicked. I was like, oh, it's like maybe that happened to us too. And we got robbed by Sasquatch.
Yeah, I know. They tend to do that. I actually had a guy on, gosh, I can't even tell you how long ago. He had the bear hang thing like you're talking about, where they keep all their food up high, you know, away from so bears won't come. And he woke up in the middle of the night and he told me that a gorilla had untied it and actually had the bag and was digging through the bag and taking stuff. And he was, I said, you sure it was a gorilla? And he goes, well, it looked like a gorilla. And they made eye contact and it didn't leave. It kept grabbing stuff out of the bag, and then it dropped the bag on the ground and then walked off with, you know, like you said, produce and not really canned goods, but just food that they had in there. Just walked off with it. How high up was that bear hang?
Let's see, the bag itself was probably, I'd say 16 feet up off the ground. It was up there.
Yeah, that's really far up there. And so it's something had untied it and actually taken the food out. That's fascinating.
Well, yeah, I mean, you really have to, bears honestly aren't that bad about getting into food as really raccoons. That's why it was up so high, because those raccoons they'll climb down the rope and get into your bag, but they'll knock it off from up top and the rope will still be in there. It'll still be in the tree hanging down, you know, or they'll like just slip the bag through the knot or hang on it until something comes untied, or, you know, but this thing had been untied from the base of the tree and lowered the way you would take it down, which I thought was interesting.
What did your friend think that you were with?
He's never talked about it a whole lot. You know, I'm not really sure, because I didn't know what to think either. I still thought it was kind of a Blair Witch situation, like there was some hillbillies out in the bush just messing with us. And I guess that's kind of what, I guess I had him convinced on that too, because I didn't know what else to think. Nothing else really made any sense. So,
does it worry you at all going out there? I mean, and having these experiences, you know, with this thing in North Carolina and the thing that happened in Minnesota. I know just from talking to you briefly, you're an outdoors guy. Does it worry you at all going out there, especially at night? Because now that you know that they're real.
Yeah, you always have it in the back of your mind, but I mean, it definitely makes me more vigilant. Even when I drive at night on a country road, I'm always looking. You know, it just really makes you aware when you know they're out there and what they can do. Because I've dealt with bears. I hear a lot of people say that like they've been in the woods for however long and they've only ever seen a bear once. I've seen a ton of bears. I don't know what it is about me, but bears seem to find me. You know, bears are one thing. I can deal with bears, but yeah, having that kind of weird just thing in the back of your mind, like, you know, because you don't have a frame of reference for it at all, so it's.
Yeah, I think it's the unpredictability of it. You know, with a bear is pretty predictable in what it's going to do.
Yeah, and you can
kind of adjust on your behavior based on a bear, just because they are predictable. You know, like here in Washington State, I've said it a million times, but here in Washington State, man, they're skittish. I've seen bears run, and you don't even really have to do anything. If they sense that you're in the area, they are gone. They want nothing to do with you.
Oh yeah, I've seen because we have black bears where I am too, and they're as well as back home in North Carolina, and I've only ever had one black bear charge me, and I hit it in the face with a canoe paddle, and it took off. So I mean, they're not, they're just kind of like big dogs almost.
Yeah, kind of. And for them to walk, I mean, for this thing to walk up and basically stand over the top of you while you're in your hammock, that's pretty ballsy, man. That's very ballsy behavior. You know, a bear might stumble over there if I don't even know if a bear would come up to you like that in a hammock unless it didn't realize you were there.
Well, actually, it has happened. I had it was probably two or 3 months back. I was camped here in Colorado, and I woke up with 3 bears around my hammock. I mean, one was so close I could have reached out and kissed it goodnight. But
no kidding, huh?
Yeah,
black bears.
I mean,
was it black?
Black bears. Yeah, they were cinnamon colored, but they're black bears. But I mean, you know, but they're obvious. It was obvious that it was a bear because I heard it. I knew it before I opened my eyes because I heard the sniffing, and I just knew it was a bear because I've heard bears sniff around before, and I was like, yep, we got a bear. And then that's when I opened my eyes and saw the other 2. But
and what did they do? Did they leave?
Leave? They just sniffed. They sniffed through camp and checked out the back of the truck, and then they left. But yeah, you know, they're obvious. It was obvious they were there. This thing, when it was standing next to my hammock, it was silent, other than its breathing alone. But I mean, I
wanted to ask you about the breathing. How would you describe that breathing?
So I've actually heard a couple of people, and I think you guys actually described it too, like with where you can hear the inhale and the exhale.
Yeah,
kind of just like it was very congested sounding breathing, but it was just, you know, you could hear it in and out. It was kind of a constant sound.
Did it remind you of like a sick bear, like a sick animal?
A little bit, yeah, it did. It sounded like, just something with bad chest congestion, really.
Yeah, and I had a scream. I wish I could play it at the moment. I don't have it loaded up. But there's a scream I wanted you to listen to and see if it was close. The scream that you heard, how would you describe it? I know, like for me, when I was in Texas and I heard the thing screaming at us, I mean, I said like a demonic scream. I mean, it sounded like a pissed off woman, kind of, I guess. Maybe that's a bad way to describe it. How would you describe the scream that you heard, though?
It kind of had, almost like you said, kind of almost like a demonic quality because it had such low tones in it. But I think part of that description comes from being able to feel it a little bit too, because that just kind of, I don't know, it doesn't sit right. But in terms of like the rest of the sound, it was almost kind of that, you hear people talk about that blend of like a lion and an elephant and maybe like a little bit of wild boar actually in there. I mean, it just was so many weird sounds kind of rolled into one, but nothing I'd ever heard before specifically. But yeah, it did have a bit of a lion's roar type quality to it, but it also was not one consistent, like one of those nice long notes that you hear sometimes in recordings. It was kind of all over the place to scream.
I know, like in Texas, so if you hear like, let's say there's a woman that just screams, it's one note, it's one constant, you know, when we as humans scream, it's pretty much a constant note. And I don't know if you experienced this, but when I was in Texas and I heard it screaming, it was like 10 different notes all in one, but it was one big scream, but it was like up and down, really high, really low, up and down, you know. That's a terrible way to describe it. I don't know if that makes sense. No, but I
know what you mean, because that's exactly what I experienced too. It was, it was like listening to almost like multiple pitches, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
One time, strange sound.
Yeah, not like like when even a cougar screams, it's one note, and that'll, cougars make weird noises, but they have one note when they scream, and when this thing screamed, it like I said, it was like multiple notes. It was the same sound, but it was multiple notes. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Yeah, it definitely does make sense. To somebody who's heard it, it totally makes sense.
And do you think that it was screaming at you because it was irritated you guys were there? I mean, is that what your impression of the scream was?
Maybe so. I mean, I'm not really sure because I feel like we were on that island all day. I don't know. It just seemed like if there was something on the island, we would have known that it was there fairly soon after we got there. You could walk from one end of the island to the other in 5 minutes. I mean, it was tiny. And the boys had already gone out and explored the whole thing. So it does seem like it followed us there. Maybe not the same one from the hammock experience, but maybe another one followed us there and was continuing to try to usher us away and on down the river. So, yeah.
When you're talking about North Carolina too, and hearing that popping sound, sometimes hunters, and I've had different hunters explain it to me, and they said it sounds like gunshots, but it's not a gunshot. And it's that really strong, the branches, in order to make a sound like that with wood, you have to have a pretty thick piece of wood that you're going to snap in order to get that pop sound. And the strength you have to do that, I don't think there's a person out there that could do that. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I've broken some, that make that loud pop, but once it pops, it's enough to throw you off your feet. Like, you'll almost go flying backwards when it finally gives. But it's exactly like that. I mean, they were just, they're big, and it was, it takes me, if I was going to break one of those off, I have to work on it for a minute. It was pretty constant. I mean, one would snap, and then another one would snap, and then hear another one, kind of off on the opposite direction, because we were camped in a round clearing. And so it was like, you'd hear one at 12 o'clock and you'd hear one at 6 o'clock, and it was just coming from all directions. It sounded like, but it's hard to really tell with being in the mountains. Sound can be funny, but it sounded like we were surrounded.
Yeah, and you probably were. And it's interesting that they came in for the food as soon as you left. It's like the old saying, they're campsite robbers, They come in and take your stuff. I mean, you hear old reports like that, although you can read them online, of where old miners will be out and these things will come in and rob them, take their stuff. I think even Albert Otzman talked about that, about them going to.
I was just listening to his story on Astonishing Legends yesterday.
Yeah, and he talked about that in his own encounter. He talked about how, I think I even did a show on it. I think before he was actually taken, a couple nights in a row, something had gone through his bag and was taking food. It was taking different things that he had packed for the trip, but hadn't taken the bag. It actually just opened the bag. Yeah,
prunes. I think it was like a bag of prunes and some flour.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was prunes and it was flour, and it was something else. I forget what they call it. It's an old, I want to say Taft. That's not right though. But it's like a hard bread, and it was taking that. It took a bunch of stuff. So it's definitely a behavior that's been reported for a long, long time, that they will come in and thank God, if you're in an area, I would hope they would come through and just take your stuff and leave you alone. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'd probably let them have it.
Scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. It was an awesome encounter. I mean, kind of a terrifying encounter. I don't blame you for, like I said, did you guys go out on the night stroll down the river because of the screaming and you were just trying to get out of there, or was that?
Basically, yeah, that was kind of my plan, was to give them a day, because, the night after the screams, we didn't really sleep much at all. We were up by the fire till almost 3 a.m. already, and then we maybe got an hour. And so I just wanted to give them kind of a change up the schedule and give them a day to sleep, and then it would be our last night anyway. And so, we'd sleep during the day and be awake through the night and moving. And they really liked that idea. So that was the whole reason for doing that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share it. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'll be sure to let you guys know if I have anything happen here in Colorado.
Yeah, please do. Please do. And I'll be down in Colorado probably in a couple of months. We'll have to hook up. I'll buy you a beer.
Very cool, man. That's awesome.
All right, brother. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, take it easy, Wes.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I will be back on Sunday for the members. Until next time, everyone, have a great night.
Human and writer, the lights to do something quieter.